want to focus on today is selling skills, and particularly how you sell higher and wider within an organization. Our business is exclusively focused on working with sales organizations, either sales teams, professionals who are involved in the sales process, or sales management teams. So if you're interested in learning more, we'd love to engage with you, but let's get right into today's topic. And so 4 areas we're going to discuss today are why access key executives, what do those key executives care about most, how to get more meetings with those key executives, and finally, what to do when you show up. So what do you do when you get there? So those are the 4 areas we want to cover today. And as a starting point, we'd love to just ask you a quick question. So I'm going to bring up the chat. Maybe someone can help us monitor the chat here. But really, what is your organization's biggest challenges selling to key executives? So I'd love to get some feedback here. And not sure we can see the chat. So Mike, we may lean on you a little bit to moderate this for us if you could.
Yes, people haven't started entering stuff in yet.
Okay, so David, just as a way, what are some of the challenges we hear most often, in terms of selling to key executives?
Well, let's see. We're starting to get some getting into the room with them. And I was going to say access. So right off the bat, we have a very in tune audience here, because that was my number one. The thing I hear all the time is I need to get access. And I'm seeing this again and again and again. Unresponsive access, no time or patience. I think that maybe is it no time or patience when you meet with them, or your reps don't have the patience to get access? It could go either way, and both are problems. Okay, so Mayo said both. Yeah,
Okay.
I would agree, both. And that really raises a problem, because a lot of times when reps get access, they don't know what to do at the meeting. I mean, that's as big of a problem as getting the meeting. They just assume it's just another sales call, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
All right, so let's back up one point. First of all, thank you very much for participating in the chat. We love kind of hearing,
Yeah.
and we do hear from clients. Access is probably the biggest challenge, but I also think, what do you do before you get there? What do you do after you get there? Really important. So we're going to walk you through that, kind of starting with what key executives care about most. And there's a little bit of research, Dave, if you want to kind of just share with you some of the audience, some of the research we've seen on this area.
Yeah, I mean, this really gets to the why. What we've seen is in the last couple of years, really during and after the pandemic, that C-level executives, they're much more involved in decision making than before. And that could be a function of the economy. I'm not sure what's really driving it, but it really points to the importance of getting in front of a key executive. I think from a sales point of view, most people are focusing on the right-hand side, which is, hey, they know intuitively that if they can get in front of the right person, that person has the authority to say yes and can close deals faster. And so the data really supports the importance of meeting with key executives.
And I would also say, just thinking about the right side, about the win rates, that's again one of the most common presenting problems, is that our win rates aren't are not high enough. So we often feel here we don't have enough opportunities in the pipeline, and kind of on the bottom side of that, we often hear our win rates are lower than they should be. So I think there's a lot of reasons to engage with key executives. And we really think about these 4 levels of alignment. And Dave, would you want to just walk us through kind of 4 levels of alignment? I'll just bring them all up on the screen here.
Yeah, and when in our Selling to Key Executives program, we have an assessment that we have salespeople take, which is, think about a typical customer, and here are their criteria, and how would you classify your alignment with that customer? So, spectator on the far left side, that's the weakest level of alignment. That means you're on the outside, as indicated by the gray circle, looking in. You're not really invited to the party, and typically, most of the people we talk to are either going to be a vendor or a preferred provider. So a vendor, you're going to be one of many. There's nothing really that's differentiating you. And again, this is from the point of view of the buyer. A preferred provider, which is on the far right-hand side, here you're one of a few. So maybe there's something differentiating you. Maybe you have some high-level relationships, but you're still one of a few, and there's still competition in the account. The best position to be and the highest level of alignment is something, we've heard this term a lot, trusted advisor or a strategic partner. What that means is you're really one of one. So that organization is looking to you, your company, your solution. You're the go-to answer to their problems, and you're going to get that first phone call. And typically, you're not going to have a lot of competition.
You know, David, it's really interesting. We talk to our clients. They often see themselves, they see their sales teams as being in the vendor preferred provider status. Ironically, a lot of sales professionals see themselves as trusted advisor and strategic partners because they've developed rapport, they have likability. But what they're really not focused on is that they aren't necessarily selling or relating to at the right level or really providing the level of insight. So we often see this misperception at the seller level that they're really a trusted advisor, a strategic partner, when in fact they're probably more of a vendor or preferred provider. So want to make sure that we're taking the steps to really elevate the conversation, elevate the access to really get to that trusted advisor, strategic partner status. When we look at, why to sell to key executives, there's really, just 5 reasons here. And maybe Dave, just in the interest of time, maybe just go through some of the highlights here as to why it's important and maybe why it's even more important now.
Well, as I mentioned, if you look at the different levels of alignment, if you're meeting with a key executive, you have the opportunity to position yourself as a strategic partner. And the benefits of that generally means a higher margin deal. And why is that? Because key executives, price is generally, and a lot of research has backed this up, price is generally not one of their big drivers, right? They have other things that are important to them. It has to be a fair price, but generally they're not going to hammer you on a price. A lower level person could easily do that. I think accelerating the decision-making process, the key executives, they have the ability to say yes. They have the ability to remove political roadblocks. So we've all probably experienced in the sales process, when we meet with the right person who's high enough up, things move much, much faster. They also have the ability to tell you about new opportunities, looking over the horizon, if you ask the right questions, which we'll get to in a few minutes, and alert you before any competition of new opportunities. Also, if you're dealing at a very high level, typically you're not going to have competition. If they trust you enough to meet with you and view you as a partner, they're not going to invite a lot of competition. So those are all the reasons, the benefits of why it's important to meet with very senior people.
Right. And I think there's another really important thing to think about is often when we talk to organizations, their salespeople are engaging at a lower level and then trying to work their way up. That's really very difficult to do. People that you're working with see you as going around them because you've started with someone and now you want to escalate because the opportunity is starting to stall out. So this idea of making decisions and moving things through the pipeline faster is really predicated on selling at the appropriate level from the beginning, not getting in the door at a lower level and working your way up. So we will talk about access strategies, which was one of the key areas that came up in the chat. But again, just one area that I would add to this list is we want to make sure we're selling at a high enough level from the outset, not trying to navigate our way up in an organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're making a great point, which is a lot of times when people engage with high-level executives, they're doing it at the end of the sales process, right? The high-level executive comes in to ratify a decision, maybe meet the finalists in a bake-off. It's pretty much too late at that point. If they've already handed off vendor selection to a lower-level person, it's a little bit too late to create a relationship with the senior executive. It's really important to do that very early in the sales process, when they can get much more involved, in vendor selection.
So I saw a question come up in the chat, about how getting access and not getting, stuck behind gatekeepers. And part of that really gets to, what is it that key executives care about? Because if you don't have something they care about, you are going to get stuck, even if you're able to capture their attention. If it's not enough to capture their interest, you're going to get pushed down the organization or get met with silence, not because they don't necessarily like you, just because they have other priorities. So I want to just pose another chat out here because this really helps just to understand who are the key executives we're trying to sell to. And I'll just bring this up as a chat real quick. So which senior executives are most important for deals within your organization? And I'll just kind of fast forward as the chat's going. Some of the answers are, of course, CEO, CFO, COO, maybe Chief Revenue Officer, Chief Marketing Officer. We can even come up with an assortment of other titles: Chief People Officer, Diversity Officer, Compliance Officer. But David, you and I were speaking, just earlier this morning that in many cases, it's really not even at the, at this level. If you're thinking about really large organizations, there's still key executives that may not necessarily have a C title.
Yeah, I'm seeing Tony say CFO and Cam is saying CTO, CIO, and I could add on the technology sale, it could be CISO. There's so many titles. I would say this, that the larger the company, right? If you're selling to a global organization, the odds of meeting with a CFO, very remote. It really depends on what you're selling. I think that at larger companies, there's whole additional layers of very senior people. So the definition of a key executive is a very relative definition. We use the C-level just as shorthand, but depending on who you sell to and what you're selling, it could be, a VP, it could even be a senior director or a director level. It just depends the size of the company. And Bengola is saying all, so it could be all of the above, again, depending on what
And
you
I
sell.
saw a really nice comment also, just head of blank. So often there are people who are heads of business heads, they're heads of divisions. Those would all fall in the broader category of key executives. So we just wanted to make that point of clarification. So initially, go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was just going to add that, I mean, you have to also be realistic, right? I mean, if I'm selling, light bulbs, and I'm not denigrating anyone selling light bulbs, I'm just using that as an example, and I'm selling to Apple, I'm not going to meet with Tim Cook. It's just, that's probably not going to happen. So I think you also have to say, what's the highest level person, who has authority that I can reasonably meet with in this organization?
Right. So I want to think about 5 questions that we should really think about when we're selling to key executives. What business outcomes can you help us achieve? So a C-suite person or a higher level key executive is really thinking about business outcomes or thinking strategically. Points of differentiation. What makes you or your offering or your company different? How will your solutions impact my organization stakeholders? So what's going to be the business impact closely related to outcomes? Can we easily and effectively work with you? Obviously, they want to make sure there's not a lot of friction. They're easy to work with. You have accessibility. And what's the long-term value? And again, Dave, you and I were speaking a little bit before. What do you see as some of the really most important points as you're thinking about it from the key executive's perspective, not just from the seller's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people, in the first chat were saying, hey, I just need access. Just give me the opportunity. And I think it's important that we flip it around and say, kind of like when the dog chases a car, what do you do when you catch the car, right? What are you going to do in the meeting? Are you just going to go through your normal sales pitch?
I think
right?
David's mic may have
really
just frozen, but I think if I've
you-
worked
are-
with
you
David
have to
long
have-
enough, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead. You were
Yeah.
making a point. I think you froze up a minute.
Oh, okay, sorry. It's really about having a mindset change. And the mindset is going from a technical seller, right? This is my product. These are the features. This is how it can benefit you, to having a strategic conversation. And I think these questions are really about, do you have a strategic mindset? And that's the kind of conversation you have to have with a key executive, as opposed to your typical sales conversation with an end user or a mid-level person.
So I want to share a quick model. And this is really the question that everyone, I think, was kind of zeroing in on at the beginning about access. And the model is called the ramp model. And Dave, do you want to just walk us through the ramp model?
Yeah, so I mean, when we think about having that mindset shift, we really start with research. We're going to get into that in a minute. We're going to talk about some tactics to get access, which is not easy, admittedly. If it was, we wouldn't be here. What do you do during the meeting? And then what do you propose? And how do you kind of keep that momentum alive?
So if you think about this just kind of strategically, you think about first where we were focusing in that orange circle. What is it that's selling that key executives really care about? And then we go from before you can gain access, you really have to do research. We can explain why. And then as David mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about access, meet, and propose, and some of the key challenges and solutions in each of these areas. So let's talk a little bit about research and why research is so important when it comes to key executives.
Yeah, and again, this is part of the mindset shift. I have a really good friend who is a very senior investment banker at a global, it's a firm that everyone would recognize, right? And he said, look, I have a limited number of clients that I cover. I only meet with boards, CEOs, CFOs. And when I meet with them, it's a Super Bowl. I have to prepare like it's my Super Bowl because I am presenting at the highest level. And when we talk to our clients, I think the salespeople, they're eager to get these meetings. They understand the value, but they don't really understand what proper preparation, what it means, and the value of preparation. I think when you prepare and you do your research, first of all, you're identifying triggers that can connect to sales opportunities. There's something going on in the business, there's an expansion, there's some economic challenge, whatever it is. I think more importantly, it differentiates you from all the other salespeople. Everyone's knocking on the C-suite doors, but not everyone is doing this level of preparation. And when someone comes in and they're prepared, that's really a big differentiator. You can uncover strategic opportunities. Just that level of preparation can help you make connections. And again, it's not making connections to your solution at the technical level. Most key executives don't care that much. It's at the strategic level. What are the strategic issues that are important to them that go above and beyond the technical solution? And
David,
also,
those are,
yeah,
go ahead.
go
I
ahead,
was
Norm.
going to say those are really good points. And I think, question often comes up, where do you find these triggers? You find them in the financial releases, you find them in the press releases. So if I was kind of thinking high level, I think about triggers, strategic opportunities, and making sure you can connect your solution to their priorities. So those were some of the few areas that I was thinking about just in terms of how do you identify these triggers? And we'll go into a little bit more deal on research. Go ahead, Dave, you were gonna say.
Yeah, well, let's advance the slide because now that we're talking about research, and what I'd say is we like to use the acronym ICP and start. And I'm going to go in reverse order. I think most salespeople are pretty good at researching the people they're meeting with. That's just a LinkedIn. Go into LinkedIn, go into Sales Navigator. It's pretty easy to do that, right? I'd say company is another area. I think most salespeople, you go to the website, again, you can use LinkedIn or Sales Navigator. You can read the press releases. Maybe if you're next level, you can read the 10K, the annual report, the 10Qs, the financial statements if they're publicly traded. You can go into your CRM if you have, a lot of data on these companies already, because maybe you've done business with them. You can talk to other people in your organization. Maybe they've sold to them. Maybe you know the people. I think where people struggle is really researching the industry and doing it in a way that helps you create fresh thinking and fresh insights. A framework that we like to teach the salespeople is doing a pest analysis, which is, what's going on politically, what's going on in the economy, socially, and then some technological things. So Norm, when you kind of look at, I know there's a lot of bullet points here, but what are some highlights kind of in each category that you think are, hey, these things can move the dial for me, or at least get me thinking in the right way?
Sure. And I think about relevancy as well, but I'll just kind of work left to right across the street. I'd say probably regulations and environmental policies. There's a lot of regulations that come out affecting different industries. Often those industries have to adjust. I would say today unemployment rates and inflation, as we've worked through the pandemic, we've seen kind of a great resignation. A lot of companies are having hiring issues. So I would say, just really, maybe it's not so much unemployment, but unfilled positions. And certainly we're working in an environment right now where I think inflation rates are at a 40-year high. Prices are going up. So there's a lot of disruption. There's also supply chain disruption that's currently happening. Socially, consumer attitudes are obviously changing. Just the way we've kind of lived today, our confidence, just going out to Zoom and connecting with people here, the way we shop for things, there's a lot going on. And technically, I think there's two main trends that we're seeing. One is this huge migration to the cloud, and that's been going on for years. And also just this hypersensitivity around security. Again, these may vary depending on the industry, but just kind of thinking off the top of my head, those would be some that I would highlight.
Right. So if I'm a C-level executive or even just a senior executive, I'm thinking about, hey, there's very high inflation, interest rates are rising. What's that doing to my profitability? What's that doing to my business outlook a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? So if I'm going to meet with that person, I really want to understand, can my solution in any way address that person's concern about profitability. You know, social, like are buying habits changing? What can I be? How can I help that executive make changes to their business? You know, I was talking to a salesperson yesterday. You know, I asked her, well, how do you get meetings with key executives? They only want to talk about one thing: migration to the cloud. I mean, they're selling a technology. You know, it's like that's just the go-to conversation they all want to have. So obviously your mileage may vary, but I think when you're going into a meeting, you really have to understand what does that key executive want to talk about, and generally it's going to be from this kind of list.
Yeah, and if you think about these just, a little bit broader, these are that's this level of research, particularly around the industry, but also the company and the individual is really what gets you to starting to achieve that trusted advisor, strategic partner type of relationship. So this is where a lot of people in our initial chat, we're really focused on access. So we want to make sure we spend a little bit of time on access. And, the first point on access is utilize referrals. We hear that a lot, there's a lot of articles and blog posts written about the importance of referrals, but are we really asking for referrals? When we work with key executives, do we really discover who's in their network? Are we doing everything we can to leverage referrals based on success? But referrals will not be enough, particularly when you're selling into key executives or the C-suite. You have to think about a compelling reason to meet and providing insights. And so there's a lot of different strategies you can use. There's quite often could be events. These could be web-based events. These could be in-person events. These could be executive briefings. Maybe it's a briefing by the chief financial officer, your chief financial officer, on trends that are occurring in an industry, marketing officer, some reason, so we found that invitations to kind of higher level functions, more strategic insights you can provide through relevant case studies, introductions to other customers who've had similar types of challenges. Those are more in the area. Dave, I'd be curious kind of your thoughts a little bit, particularly in these second two areas.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about utilizing your senior executives at your company, hey, my chief marketing officer is going to give a private briefing about our product roadmap, right? My CFO is going to talk about X, Y, and Z. Obviously, you have to coordinate this, with your senior team. You can't just willy-nilly offer it up. You talked about client events, very effective way to kind of create interest. In providing insights, that word's thrown around, but you have to really ask yourself, what do I have something new to talk about? I'm a big fan of, do you have new research? That's always going to be appealing, right? Hey, we have data on how other clients are solving the XYZ problem. I mean, that is such a go-to way to create engagement, really at any level. People really want to hear about that. In particular, if you have data, not sharing confidential information, but how other people in the industry are doing it. So if you can go to a C-level executive and say, hey, I have information, again, not confidential, but just general information on how other people in your industry are solving the XYZ problem, that is a go-to way of creating engagement with that person.
Yeah, and I think it really gets down to relevancy. Are you providing something that's highly relevant that they're going to find to be of value, what will pique their interest? And it's really when you pique their interest that you're really able to start to gain that access.
Yeah, and Bengal is pointing out Michael Porter, who is a very famous Harvard Business School professor, whose 5 forces. I think he has I think the book's A Competitive Strategy, a very famous book. That is, of course, a seminal book on strategic consulting, and I'd highly recommend it. For salespeople to read, to really understand some of the mega forces impacting any industry. So thanks for pointing that out.
And in the interest of time, we'll move on. But what other thing I'll mention is salespeople often rely on sequences. They could have email sequences. They could have phone sequences that complement the email sequences. And they're using, others in the industry have found, but they're speaking in generalities. These really need to be very targeted to get access. They need to have a targeted subject line. They need to have targeted insights. And it can't just be this general thing and saying, well, this is going to create interest. Usually something that's very targeted that shows that you've done your research is the best way to gain access.
Yeah, let me just add a quick point to that. Like if your email sequence looks like it was written by your marketing department, so it's just generic, I wouldn't bother sending it. It's not going to be effective, with a C-level executive or any senior executive. This is the one time, I mean, a lot of times you have to balance when you're prospecting and trying to get access. Hey, I can't do this level of research for 1,000 prospects. But when you're selling to a key executive, your universe is very narrow. So what you really need to do is say, I really need to invest time to come up with an insight that's very customized to this target. And the more you're able to customize it, the better the response you're going to get.
Really important. I think that somehow the slide advanced a little quickly there, but I want to talk about,
Okay.
Well, how about the meeting? What do you do when you get there? And I have a poll that I want to bring up. So Mike, if you could help us with the poll, because we go to meet with a key executive, it really has to be a key executive meeting, one that they find of value. And we shouldn't just think about it, this really gets also back to access a little bit. Will it be valuable to us? Is the meeting going to be valuable to them? We should only try and sell to the C-suite or to a key executive when it's relevant. If it's not relevant, we may be selling to someone else within the organization, and it may be more of a transactional sale. This C access should really be reserved for strategic opportunities. But curious, what percentage of sales meetings do you think key executives think are a waste of their time? So you've been successful in gaining this meeting. They've got the key executive to attend. And I'll just leave that open for a minute. And Dave, kind of your thoughts just in terms of, what makes a meeting valuable for a key executive?
Well, I think the first thing you have to really think about is how you ask the question from the key executive's point of view. If you ask the salesperson, they're going to get very excited and say, that was a great meeting because I was able to advance a sale or I built rapport. But really, it's very difficult for people to put themselves into the shoes of the key executive. When you do that, I think what they're looking for is, do you have a fresh insight for me? Are you making me think about a problem in a way that I've never thought about the problem before? I think those are the things that key executives really value.
So for sure, you don't want to show up there with your canned presentation. We'll talk a little bit about how to show up. But Mike, do you want to share with us what we've got so far? Okay, so well over half of the responses are that key executives do not value the meeting. And that's really consistent, Dave, with an article I just saw in Forbes yesterday. I was doing a little bit of research on this myself and said that 50% of all meetings are considered to be a waste of time. So I can only think that number is even higher with key executives. So if we earn the right to get that meeting with the key executive, to your friend's example, let's really make sure we've prepared like it's a Super Bowl. So we're not in that 50% where the key executive says, well, that was a waste of my time.
Right.
So Mike, go ahead and close the poll. We'll move on. I think this is really, though, insightful because if we're going to work so hard to get the meeting, let's make sure we really create value when we do show up.
Right. And, to add to your point, these meetings are few and far between. And we always tell people, you really have to have a very clear meeting objective going into the meeting. And it really needs to be a focused objective. So your objective can't be close the deal. That's just not realistic. It has to be attainable. There has to be a clear action you want the executive to take, right? Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. And, I always talk about measurables. Like, how do you know after the fact that the meeting was a success? It can't just be, Norman's a great guy. We had a great meeting. That's fuzzy. And from a sales leader's point of view, I don't really know what happened in terms of measuring the quality and the outcome of the meeting. And I would kind of just say, more importantly, when you think about meeting planning before the meeting, kind of the consistent theme that we always hear is you walk into a meeting, and this is our experience too with a key executive, you have a half hour on their calendar, they come in 15 minutes late, or you're on a Zoom call with them and they're bouncing from meeting to meeting and suddenly someone slips them a note and they have to leave because of some crisis. So you always need to be prepared when you're planning for the meeting, having your time very carefully choreographed and what happens when your time gets cut in half. And that happens much more frequently than you think it would happen.
So Dave, you're making two really key points. One is in terms of meeting preparation, particularly often when we show up to meet with key executives, whether that's virtually or in person, and maybe more than one person from the seller organization, make sure there's an attainable goal. What is it? What's our objective? What are we looking for from the key executive? And how are we going to measure we're successful or not? And I can't, I couldn't agree with you more. Quite often that you leave that meeting fuzzy. The sales professional says, oh, that was a great meeting. They really liked us, but we really didn't zero in on what was our objective, what actions, is it measurable? I want to go
Yeah.
a little bit, go ahead.
Well, hey, no, I just want to point out that in the chat, John's making a really good point that 3 things key executives are concerned about: decrease cost, increase revenue, minimize risk. There's more, but you know what? If those only the 3 things you remember, you're not going to do badly. So decrease cost, increase revenue, minimize risk. Those are always, go-to things you can talk about.
I'm going to comment on this slide very briefly because I know we want to allow some time for questions during the meeting. Develop rapport, but with key executives, you want to keep that short. They're not interested in long rapport building techniques. As David mentioned, you could get timed out. You do want to build credibility. That's about the knowledge and the research you've done. And you want to be very clear why you're there. Let the key executive or key executives that are in the meeting know exactly why you're there. So think about it. You want to quickly develop rapport. Obviously you want to use some of those rapport building skills. We won't get into that today. You want to build your credibility, show that you've done your homework, you've come in and you've got a stated purpose. And David, I do want you to expand on this one, if you could, a little bit more, because I think it's so important to that first diagram we put in where there's 4 levels of alignment about the, salesperson versus strategic advisor.
I mean, this is really gets to a selling skill problem and the mindset shift, which is the salesperson, they're asking qualification questions, right? They're trying to qualify the opportunity, advance the opportunity. It's really a focus on having a discovery conversation. That's the wrong kind of conversation to have. So you never want to ask a key executive, hey, what keeps you up at night? I mean, when you ask that, you are putting yourself in the category of the journeyman salesperson that's kind of wasting his or her time. The strategic advisor is asking questions that really demonstrate a higher level of knowledge, their expertise. So how is inflation impacting your business this year? How is that impacting your hiring decisions, your production capabilities, whatever? Higher level questions that get to the impact of problems and the implications of solving those problems. Those are the kind of questions you want to ask because they get the key executive to think about problems in a different way. And when you're able to do that, they're going to say, well, that Norman, he's operating at my level, the key executive level. He's just not another salesperson who comes in my office.
And I think what's important here is thinking about those questions in advance and actually writing down some of those questions and making sure the questions you're asking really are strategic questions, not questions you could have answered in advance of the meeting, possibly by doing more research or asking maybe your day-to-day contact or maybe some kind of coach that you have within the company, and really looking at these key questions that get to, what are the priorities and positioning yourself as that strategic advisor. In terms of propose, kind of last aspect of this, then we'll get into a little bit of Q&A. 5 elements of a key executive value presentation. So target the outcomes, and this is really key, articulated by the key executive. So you're going to use those questions to get them to target what their outcomes are. Summarize the problems and opportunities that you hear from the key executive. Then describe how your solution aligns with their priorities. To the extent you can provide proof points, cite examples and evidence. Express the value or solution in ways they satisfy. I think you mentioned there was really good input on that in the chat just a minute ago. And then articulate next steps. And I think, Dave, you were mentioning before, and I'd love you to expand on this, about meeting management. We could come into what we think is an hour meeting. We find out that we've only got 45 minutes because we started late. We could be on Zoom. And I find that quite often we kind of get through 1, 2, and 3, and then get rushed when it comes to 4 and 5. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice to make sure we allow enough times, particularly to summarize the value and articulate the next steps.
Yeah, I mean, you really need to be focused and you really have to practice, because if the meeting gets cut short and you don't have clearly defined next steps, you've wasted the meeting, because you will be handed off or the key executive will forget that you met or what they've even said. You really need to have clearly defined next steps.
Right. On just kind of after the meeting, these are pretty straightforward. Thank the key executives for their ideas and feedback. Summarize the highlights, identify the next steps, and be very specific, even if you have to do that in an email. And make sure you may actually get referred to someone lower within the organization, that you have a plan to reconnect with the key executive. If they've asked you to work with someone on a project or come back with information, make sure you've kind of already set up that next step, maybe even block the next meeting. And then as you between contacts, provide additional value. Think about, what did I learn in that meeting? What kind of research, what kind of events, what kind of information can I provide that's on topic to kind of keep that conversation alive? So again, in the interest of time, this is kind of a Cliff Notes version of a program we offer. I will share with you that that program is going to be available publicly. Most of the workshops we do are private workshops. If you're interested in this program or any other program that we offer for sales professionals, for managers, we'd love to engage with you. If you're interested in the public workshop, more information available, I think, on our homepage. But Mike, want to make sure we allow enough time for at least a couple of questions. So let me turn it back to you and just say, on behalf of SRG, myself, David, we're delighted to be here today, and thank training industry. So Mike, let's turn it back to you for any kind of questions.
Yes, we have a few questions. Sandy would like to know, do you have any suggestions when a key executive delegates responsibility to a low-level person?
So I think that depends on when that happens. If it's happening before you've actually had the meeting, I think you want to see if you can still create enough value to engage the key executive. So in other words, before you just get pushed down to someone lower in the organization, maybe take a second run at access. I try and use the term professionally persistent. You certainly don't want to be annoying. If you get it pushed down after you've had the meeting, that may be very appropriate. The key executive is not going to be able to work on every one of their initiatives. It's very common for them to delegate. So let's say you've had this meeting with the key executive, and then they ask you to work with someone on their team. In that case, I think it's just really important that you have a way to reconnect and share with them what you've learned. So I think it's a little bit tense on timing, and also just make sure you do have that plan to reconnect.
Thank you. Lindsay would like to know, how do you differentiate from the competition when selling to a key executive?
David, you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, what I'd say is, when you differentiate, it's important to differentiate, maybe not so much on a feature and product functionality point of view, but maybe more at a strategic level. The key executive isn't going to care that much about your product can do X versus Y, but it may be more that, hey, directionally, our product is going here, so long term, we're doing something different, right? Or our people, here's how we're different from a people point of view, or our technology platform is fundamentally different. So in general, you have to differentiate at a slightly higher level than, the competition checks 3 boxes and we check 5 boxes. The key executive doesn't really care about that.
And I want to expand on that. I think also sales professionals can differentiate by the way they show up, by the way they engage. Are communications well written? Have they done enough research? In other words, people ultimately, especially key executives, buy from people they trust and that can add value. So don't forget the importance of not just in terms of how your solution is differentiated, but how you as a sales professional are differentiated from your competition.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. Bailey would like to know, what's most compelling to key executives?
I think what's most compelling to key executives, and Dave, you may want to expand on this, is something that impacts their business strategically. They have, we think about that pest analysis on the industry. So what's going on politically, what's going on in the economy, socially, technologically wise. There's going to be something or more than one thing in there that's happening in their industry that they're really not sure exactly how to navigate. So the extent you can give them some research or some insights about something that's happening in their industry that's going to impact their business, and you can help them address that in a strategic, thoughtful way, to me, that's probably what they would value the most.
Yeah, I would say that they're going to have a list of 2 to 3 very important initiatives top of mind. And if you can somehow, and this is not easy, through research, investigation, talking to people, you may need like a customer coach who's 2 levels below. What are those important 2 to 3 important initiatives that are just top of mind that they've maybe, committed to the board of directors to engage and solve? What are those initiatives? Can your solution connect to one of those initiatives? That's always going to be a go-to way of getting their attention.
And just keep in mind, you can often find these if they're publicly traded in their financial reports, in their 10Ks, their 10Qs, certainly in their press releases. They'll often outline, or in a 10K in the annual report, they'll articulate what their annual priorities are. It demonstrates you've done your research. It also gives you good insights as to what their priorities are that they've shared publicly.
Yeah, and if you have a contact in the company, for sure you want to like leverage that contact to learn more about what are the important priorities. I mean, that's just
Right.
the gold mine of information.
A whole area we didn't cover just in the interest of time, but this whole idea of
Yes.
leveraging your existing contacts within that organization so that you can use a key executive time wisely and leverage the information you find. So Mike, probably a little bit more there than you expected for the last question, but thank you for letting us kind of complete those thoughts.